Hello everyone, a very good morning. Welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to our daily Hindu analysis. Before we begin, don't forget our Target Prelims 2023, which is a free crash course for helping you cover all the current affairs, has begun on our YouTube channel. Today, the third session for Indian economy will be conducted by Shyam sir at 7:30 p.m. live on the YouTube channel. So without fail, do catch the session and also take a look at the detailed schedule for the free crash course. Do attend these sessions live and you can find the details in the description box below as well. So we hope you make complete use of the free crash course, which would help you immensely for the upcoming prelims exam. So let's begin the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. I have chosen three important columns which have been reported in page number 8, page number 10, and as well as in few other pages such as page number 1 and 15 of the Hindu, of the Delhi edition of the Hindu. We shall be carrying out a detailed analysis of these topics as they are very important for your mains. Of course, a lot of points will be relevant for your prelims, but the detailed discussion will really help you for your mains exam. And after that, we shall take a look at few smaller articles which are more relevant for the prelims exam. So this is what we have lined up for today's discussion. Now, before we begin, why don't you support us by pressing the like button? Share more and more comments, because your comments is something that keeps us going. It motivates us to do better. So just let us know how these sessions are going, any suggestions, or in general, try to comment more. And also don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And as soon as the session ends, directly head to our Telegram channel because we have a quiz on these topics. Even that will help you in revising these topics again. Now, without wasting any further time, let's begin with the first topic. As many of you know, the African country of Sudan has been going through a deep crisis since the last few days. In fact, since many years, Sudan has been going through a political crisis. This crisis has aggravated, it has deepened, and this faraway development is of direct concern for India. Today we have multiple articles in the newspaper referring to the crisis in Sudan, how Indians have been trapped in the country, and how the Indian government has yet again launched a complex evacuation mission to bring the Indians back home safely. So we have an article in the front page itself, and we also have few other smaller articles on page 15, and we also have an editorial on page number 8. So I'm going to merge all the articles and bring in a lot of additional information as well, and we'll carry out a thorough evaluation of this topic. First, let's begin with the context. Sudan, as I told you, is a major African country, one of the largest African countries, located in the northeast region of Africa, and it is blessed with immense resources. It is blessed with gold, oil and gas, and as well as many other precious minerals. So obviously, Sudan has been a focus for many regional and global powers, and you find US and Russia in direct strategic competition in countries such as Sudan. But internally, Sudan has faced a lot of problems and challenges over the decades. From 1950s, this country has seen multiple military coups, where the military has captured power by throwing out the governments, where different actors have engaged in violence against each other to capture political power. So Sudan is not new to such crisis situations. It has seen multiple military coups, and it has been ruled by authoritarian dictators who have often committed large-scale human rights violations in the country. So back in 2019, Sudan was ruled by a notorious dictator called Omar al-Bashir. He was one of the notorious dictators from Africa. He had ruled Sudan for many years. His dictatorship was finally toppled in 2019 when the civilians rose up in protest. Civilians were pushing for democracy. They wanted a civilian government. And this protest, which was backed by the Sudanese armed forces, forced the then Sudanese dictator Omar al-Bashir to step down. So this is how the dictatorship was brought down, and the future of Sudan had to be decided, to decide upon the future government. So the civilians who had led the protests, they were very clear that they wanted democracy in the country. They wanted civilian rule. They weren't willing to give away the power back to the military. The Sudanese armed forces at that point struck an agreement with the civilian protesters, and it agreed for a transition government. A temporary transition government was put in place which had representation from both civilians and the military. This transition government was supposed to give way for a full-fledged democracy in the country. But before this transition could happen, the Sudanese armed forces, which has always been power hungry, started consolidating its power, and in 2021, it again carried out a military coup where the Sudanese military captured power again by overthrowing the recognized government. In the meantime, there was another paramilitary organization, another security force in Sudan called RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. The RSF was supporting the then dictator Omar al-Bashir. Later, it was having good relations with the Sudanese armed forces as well. But after the 2021 coup, where the Sudanese armed forces threw out the transition government and captured power, a conflict began between the generals of these two forces. You can see both the generals here in these images. These generals head the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF respectively. So a power struggle has begun between these two forces from the last few months, and now this has escalated into actual violence. Since the last week, Sudan has essentially descended into civil war as fighting has broken out between the Sudanese military and the RSF paramilitary forces. So this has pushed Sudan again into a state of civil war. And even though it's a faraway development and not of direct concern to India, the topic becomes very important, very relevant, because we have major interests in Africa. India has prioritized African diplomacy in the last 15 to 20 years. Africa is blessed with resources, and India would like to compete with other global powers like US, Russia, European powers, and especially China. India has scaled up its investments, not just in Southern Africa and East Africa, where we are traditionally influential, but we are also paying more attention to Central Africa, Western Africa, and Northern Africa. Sudan's neighbor Egypt, for example, is a very good friend of India. So naturally, India has interests, diplomatic, geopolitical interests in such countries. But more than that, what is of concern for India is the plight of Indians who are currently trapped in this conflict zone. Since the last 1 week, intense fighting has broken out where the armed forces, they have destroyed the public infrastructure. Banks have stopped functioning. Basic services are not available. That is water, electricity, transportation. Everything has come to a halt, and essentially the country is in a crisis mode. According to reports, there are around 4,000 Indians in Sudan, most of whom have gone for basic jobs, for their livelihood opportunities. Many of them are traders, businessmen, etc. See, India has a presence in almost every country today. Indians in general, they move out to various countries around the world, be it the developed Western countries or even the underdeveloped African countries. You will find the Indian community everywhere. We have a very strong diaspora presence. If some go to study, some go to work, some go for business and trade, right? And this represents a strong cultural link for India as well. So in Sudan as well, we have around 4,000 Indians from many years. A lot of Indians, businessmen, traders, workers, they go to Sudan for a livelihood opportunity. This includes members of the Hakki-Pikki tribe from Karnataka. This topic gained a lot of attention since the last few days. In fact, we have even covered a special video on the crisis in Sudan and who are the Hakki-Pikki tribe. You can go and watch that on our YouTube channel. The Hakki-Pikki tribe, they are essentially a tribe from northern India. They are semi-nomadic. Over the years, they have moved down to southern India and they have settled mainly in Karnataka. In parts of Mysore, Shumaga, Davangere, in this belt, you find the Hakki-Pikki tribe. In Kannada, Hakki Pikki translates to bird catcher. Basically, it's a bird catching community. They used to catch birds, and that was their primary occupation. But such activities were prohibited in 1970s when India started paying more attention to environmental issues. We came out with the Wildlife Protection Act, Project Tiger. So all these laws and policies led to the prohibition on bird catching, and as a result, this tribe was deprived of their livelihood. So the only other skill that Hakki Pikki tribe had was to make herbal medicines. They are seen as part of the Ayurvedic system of alternate medicines. And in Africa, there is a huge demand for Ayurvedic medicines. In fact, India is the biggest drug supplier to Africa. We supply the biggest volume of generic drugs. I'm talking about allopathic medicines produced by our pharmaceutical companies. Apart from allopathic medicines, even the Ayush form of medicines, the alternate medicines from India are very popular in Africa. So members of Hakki Pikki tribe have traveled to many African countries, including Sudan, to sell their herbal medicines. So as a result, around 4,000 Indians are trapped, including members of Hakki Pikki tribe, and unfortunately, one Indian was killed as well. One Indian from Kannur district of Kerala was accidentally shot during the ongoing crisis. So this has put tremendous pressure on the Indian government because the government of India is responsible for ensuring the safety and well-being of the Indian community abroad. The Indian government has a duty to protect the Indian community abroad. See, helping the Indian community abroad or rescuing them, bringing them back is not an act of charity from the government. There are many, especially on social media, who question why these people went out of India in the first place. Why do they go to such hazardous countries? Or why should the government help them out? This is generally a defense against any criticism of the government. Let me tell you why this position is extremely wrong and incorrect. Because Indian community abroad plays a critical role in our foreign policy. They act as our cultural ambassadors abroad, representing Indian civilizational culture. They're an extension of India's soft power diplomacy. They give us leverage in foreign countries with foreign governments. They help in generating goodwill for India in foreign countries. They help influence foreign governments and foreign politics as well. And more importantly, they send back remittances to their families in India. The money they send back to their families back in India comes as inward remittances to India. And today, India is the world's largest recipient of inward remittances. We receive more than $100 billion every year, which is critical for bridging our current account deficit. So the Indian community abroad is playing a critical role in our economy and in our foreign policy. So it's only a duty of the government to protect and help the Indian community abroad. They might face visa-related issues. They might face legal issues. So in all these cases, the government of India is responsible for ensuring the well-being of the Indian diaspora. That is why this topic is part of your syllabus under international relations. If you look at GS Paper 2 syllabus, there is a separate topic on Indian diaspora. So as far as the responsibility of the government is concerned, ensuring the safety and well-being of the Indian community is absolutely critical. So that is the reason why the Ministry of External Affairs has worked with all the partners in the region, and it has launched a major evacuation mission called Operation Kaveri. It has been codenamed Operation Kaveri, which is being led by the Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force. So let's take a detailed look at these developments. To understand this evacuation mission, first you should know where Sudan is located. You should know the geography. You can even expect map-based questions here in your prelims. As I told you, Sudan is an African country, one of the largest African nations in the northeast of Africa. It's bordered by Egypt, Libya, Chad, Central African Republic, South Sudan, the newest country in the world, which broke away from Sudan in 2011 as a result of the constant civil war and crisis in the country. Then Ethiopia, a major partner for India. India has a lot of investments in Ethiopia. We have a lot of Indians in Ethiopia as well. Egypt is again a critical partner for India. For this year's Republic Day parade, Egyptian president was invited as a chief guest, which means India is going to pay more attention to our ties with Egypt this year. Then you have Eritrea. And more importantly, Sudan, it is a littoral of the Red Sea. It opens towards the Red Sea, the strategic Red Sea, which is a connection between the Arabian Sea here and the Mediterranean Sea over here. It's a vital shipping route that passes via choke points, strategic choke points such as the Suez Canal, located at the Sinai Desert, the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. And there's one more choke point here called Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is a narrow opening connecting the Gulf of Aden with the Red Sea. This here is Horn of Africa. This horn-shaped region of Africa is Horn of Africa. So this whole route that you're seeing here in the map is a vital shipping lane that connects Indian Ocean with the Atlantic. It's a critical route for India as well, because this is what connects India with European markets. So all our imports and exports with European countries is heavily dependent on this route, where there are two choke points. Suez Canal is a choke point, while it connects Mediterranean with Red Sea. Red Sea itself is a very narrow water body, and there's one more choke point here called Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is connecting Red Sea with Gulf of Aden. So India has major economic strategic interests in this shipping channel. So we constantly have a military deployment, a naval deployment near Horn of Africa and Bab el-Mandeb Strait. In fact, many foreign navies have a military deployment here near Bab el-Mandeb Strait to stabilize the region, because the region witnesses civil war, terrorism, piracy, etc. So India does have a strong military presence. We have very close diplomatic relations with most countries here. And this is what is going to help India to safely bring Indians back home from Sudan. Currently, Indians are trapped in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, and few other cities as well. There are few Indians in the faraway Darfur region. Darfur is in the western part of Sudan. So all across Sudanese cities, there are Indians who are trapped. And the Indian embassy at Sudan is working very hard to coordinate with them and evacuate them to the port of Sudan that is located on the Red Sea. So Indians are being brought by road through buses, because every other mode of transportation has been suspended. As I told you, banks are not functioning and essential services are not functioning. So Indians have to struggle for arranging transportation. They are paying middlemen or transport providers to hire cars, buses, trucks, whatever is available. And with the help of Indian Embassy, they are moving towards Port of Sudan, where the Indian Embassy has set up a camp office at Port of Sudan. And the Ministry of External Affairs has been coordinating with all concerned stakeholders, including the Defense Ministry, the Indian Navy, the Indian Air Force, and other concerned entities. So to make this evacuation possible, India needs the help of few countries. India has worked closely with US and UK, which have influence in Sudan. In fact, the evacuation is possible right now because the US has brokered a ceasefire for 72 hours. Or else the fighting was so intense that it was almost impossible to carry out the evacuation. In fact, as soon as the fighting began, as soon as the crisis began, India mobilized very quickly, and India deployed its military assets in the nearby region to be ready for an evacuation. Luckily for India, there was an Indian naval ship, INS Sumedha, which was already transiting in the same region. INS Sumedha was at Port Said in Egypt, participating in a military exercise with the Egyptian Navy. So quickly, INS Sumedha was diverted through Suez Canal into the Red Sea, and it already docked and it had anchored at the port of Sudan over here. And you can see Jeddah, the major commercial city of Saudi Arabia, which is near the sacred pilgrimage sites such as Mecca and Medina. And Saudi Arabia is a very, very close friend of India. India has built strategic ties with Saudi Arabia. We are very close partners. And with the help of Saudi Arabia, India has stationed the C-130J Super Hercules transport aircraft of the Indian Air Force at Jeddah Airport. So the required military assets were placed by India ready for carrying out Operation Kaveri. But the problem was there was no break in fighting. And the violence was so intense that it would be risky to carry out the evacuation. So all countries, they desperately wanted a ceasefire because every country had their citizens trapped here. To carry out the evacuation, they wanted a ceasefire in place. The US, which is very influential in Sudan, has managed to convince both the fighting parties to halt the war for at least 72 hours. So as soon as the ceasefire began, immediately India leveraged its contacts with Saudi Arabia and as well as UAE. Both these West Asian powers have influence in Sudan. They have resources in Sudan. And India is leveraging these diplomatic influences to ensure that this evacuation becomes a success. So as Indians are being brought by road through buses and other vehicles, at Port Sudan, India is ensuring all logistics are in place. And INS Sumeda has managed to transport the first batch of Indians to the Jeddah port in Saudi Arabia, which is located just around 300 kilometers away. It's just around 1 day's journey from here. So from here, Indian Air Force will transport the Indians back home. So this mission will include multiple rounds because there are 4,000 plus Indians who are trapped, and even friendly countries, they've already started reaching out to India to help them out as well. Even Sri Lanka has few citizens trapped in Sudan. So there's an article on page 15 which talks about this. Sri Lanka, which is a close friend of India, has asked for India's help to pull out Sri Lankan citizens as well during this evacuation mission. And trust me, this is not the first time that India is doing this. In fact, India has an incredible track record of pulling off these successful and risky evacuations. This is a record we have built over the last 30 years. Over the last 3 decades, India has carried out multiple such evacuation missions, and this is exactly what the editorial is examining. The editorial is talking about India's successful initiatives with US and UK and how the US has helped in placing a ceasefire that helps India and other countries to carry out the evacuation. The editorial also takes note of the close ties between India and Saudi Arabia and UAE, which are playing a key role in helping evacuating the Indian citizens. Saudi Arabia has not only used its influence in Sudan, but it is also allowing India, the Indian Air Force and Indian Navy, to use the Jeddah port to bring Indians back home. So this brings us to the topic of India's expertise in conducting such complex evacuation missions, especially from conflict zones. As I told you, this is not new to India. It's not that we have started evacuating people in the last 2-3 years. This has been happening from almost 3 decades, and India has built up a lot of expertise in this domain. So to carry out any such complex evacuation, you need a lot of diplomatic influence, and it's also a question of your military capabilities. Because this requires a lot of coordination with multiple stakeholders. Within India, the Ministry of External Affairs will have to coordinate with the security forces, the armed forces, the Navy and the Air Force especially, the Defense Ministry, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, private airlines, Ministry of Shipping, private ships and carriers, right? Along with other concerned stakeholders. And outside of India, the MEA will have to coordinate with foreign countries, with allies, friends, and with the parties who are fighting against each other. The host country, the other forces which are the rebel groups which might be carrying out the civil war. We may have to establish contact with all of them, negotiate with them to work out a safe passage for pulling out the Indian nationals. So this is a test of your diplomatic skills. It's a test of your geopolitical influence. And it also is a test of your military strength, because you may have to deploy your naval and air force assets into faraway regions to carry out this complex evacuation. And India has been able to pull this off repeatedly again and again in the last 30 years. It all started with the Kuwait airlift in 1990. When Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, had invaded Kuwait, there were lakhs of Indians who were trapped in Iraq and Kuwait. Around 1,70,000 plus Indians. All of them were safely evacuated through a complex mission, and this was the world's largest evacuation. It held the world record for many years for being the world's largest human evacuation. And India carried out this evacuation successfully because of the close ties we had with Saddam Hussein. Iraq has always been a top oil supplier to India. India leveraged those ties to work out an arrangement so Indians could be pulled out from the conflict zone. Then in 2006, Lebanon descended into a civil war and 5,000 Indians were trapped. Fortunately, Indian Navy had a deployment in the Mediterranean Sea even then. There were 3 Indian naval ships coming back from a military exercise in Europe. Quickly, they were diverted from Suez Canal towards Lebanon. And through Operation Sukoon, more than 5,000 Indians were brought back, along with citizens of friendly countries such as Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, etc. In 2011, when Libya descended into a civil war, 15,000 Indians, mainly Indian nurses, were trapped in Libya. So Indian Navy again had to be deployed along with private airlines and ships to bring back the Indians safely. This was Operation Safe Homecoming. Recently, when Yemen descended into a civil war led by the Houthi rebels, 5,000 Indians were trapped in Yemen as well, and through Operation Rahat, Indian Navy brought back the Indians. And this time, even Western countries asked India for help. Japan, European countries, US and Canada and Australia, even they asked India for help, as India was the first country to reach Yemen with evacuation support. So along with rescuing Indians, we rescued hundreds of foreign nationals as well. So this is again a projection of India's soft power and projects India's diplomatic and military influence. The biggest ever evacuation has to be during the pandemic. As the pandemic and travel restrictions kicked in, there were lakhs of Indians trapped around the world. So through Operation Samudra Setu, the Indian Navy brought back few thousand Indian nationals, and over several weeks through Vande Bharat mission, India's private carriers, they brought back lakhs and lakhs of Indians through air bubble arrangements that Indian government had created with other countries. Then Afghanistan was recently captured by Taliban, and the country again descended into chaos in 2021. So India evacuated its nationals and even friendly Afghan citizens through Operation Devi Shakti, carried out by the Indian Air Force. And last year, when Russia invaded Ukraine, 20,000 Indians were trapped in Ukraine, most of them medical students. They were all successfully brought back through Operation Ganga, which included missions being carried out by Indian Air Force and as well as the private carriers of India. So this is something India has done repeatedly, and India has built up a certain degree of expertise in this domain. So now it's very, very important for India to further streamline this expertise. Because see, we have a very huge Indian community abroad. There are at least 14 million NRIs, non-resident Indians, right? This doesn't even consider people of Indian origin and overseas citizens of India. This is only NRIs, non-resident Indians, who are studying, working abroad. There are more than 7 million Indian tourists who travel abroad every year. This is a very, very big number. And they will be found in almost every country around the world. So if a country descends into conflict, or if even there is a disaster, right, Indians will be affected by it. So it's high time for India to streamline this capability by establishing a standard operating procedure. Because there are lakhs of Indian students studying abroad, lakhs of Indian workers, especially manual laborers in countries like Libya, Syria, Lebanon, which are all very volatile countries. There are Indian nurses in several countries in West Asia, in Africa, right? Many of them are very volatile. They're very vulnerable for such conflicts. So it's better for India to build up permanent capabilities in this domain. That's what the editorial is suggesting. It suggests India should even set up a special force that will bring capabilities of all the stakeholders together, which will be ready to carry out such an evacuation during times of crisis. In fact, this was a recommendation given by the Parliamentary Standing Committee for External Affairs in 2022. A parliamentary panel had recommended the establishment of a special force by drawing from Indian Navy, Indian Air Force and Ministry of External Affairs. So India would be ready and prepared to carry out such evacuations. So editorial is saying this recommendation should be implemented along with laying down the SOPs, the standard operating protocols or procedures, so that India could further fine-tune this expertise to help out Indians who might get caught in such difficult circumstances. But however, there is a note of caution. Political parties and the ruling party especially should avoid creating political controversies over these evacuation missions, and the government should avoid credit-seeking behavior. Because see, India has built up an incredible reputation in this domain, and this reputation is at risk because of domestic politics within India. Oh, the recent evacuation of Haki-Piki tribe members from Sudan. A political controversy broke out between Foreign Minister Jaishankar and former CM of Karnataka, Siddaramaiah. A Twitter spat broke out between them. It was an unnecessary political controversy which was initiated by both the politicians. And similarly, it has been noted that the government tends to engage in credit-seeking behavior. This is to please the domestic audience, right? This is something that should be avoided because playing politics over these issues is going to harm India's reputation, and it could even compromise your future missions to evacuate your citizens if they are trapped in such conflict zones. So this is what we need to take away from these articles. And finally, there's another related article on page 15. According to this article, there is a bio lab in Sudan which is at great risk according to the WHO. This highlights the risk posed by warfare and conflicts. The WHO has expressed alarm about a biological lab, a high-grade biosafety lab, which is storing samples of several dangerous pathogens. Is that clear? This lab has been taken over by the parties which are fighting the civil war in Sudan. The Sudanese military and the RSF paramilitary forces which are fighting each other, they have captured this high security biosafety lab which has live samples of extremely dangerous pathogens. It has samples of malaria, Ebola and other dangerous diseases. And WHO is concerned that if the conflict escalates and if the samples are damaged, there is a possibility of the samples leaking out, and it could result in the breakout of dangerous deadly diseases in the middle of the conflict. This is similar to how there were concerns about a nuclear accident occurring in Ukraine when Russia was targeting nuclear plants in Ukraine. When Russia stepped up fighting near Chernobyl and the Zaporozhye nuclear plant, similar concerns came up in Ukraine about a possible nuclear disaster. And the International Atomic Energy Agency even sent inspectors to Ukraine to ensure both parties don't carry out an attack on the nuclear plant, which could turn into a nuclear accident. So similar bio concerns have come up in Sudan. WHO is closely monitoring the developments. It's trying to ensure the integrity and safety of this lab, as there are live samples of dangerous pathogens stored in this Sudanese biosafety lab. So this highlights the risk posed by such conflicts and internal situations. So now let's move on to another important column from page number 10. In the text and context page, the Hindu carries a detailed article which explains the temperature abnormalities that we are experiencing today. The topic is relevant for both for geography and environment and ecology. So let's understand what the column is talking about. What's the context? And let's cover the basic concepts as well that are dealt with under this article. See, I'm sure all of you have been experiencing the intense weather, the intense heat wave conditions that have gripped India, right? The summer season has begun, and across the country there are very high temperatures being reported. Recently there was a report that March 2023 was the second warmest March that is on record. This is with regard to the global mean temperature. If you take the global mean average temperature, the March of this year, 2023, is said to be the second warmest month of March that is on record. That is ever since we started keeping record of global average temperatures. Now, what does this exactly mean? Does it mean that year on year the temperature is constantly increasing? Or does it mean it's a direct result of climate change only, or are there any other factors responsible for these temperature abnormalities? It's very, very important to contextualize these reports which come out. Because see, any such report, it becomes headlines. It is usually sensationalized. On the headlines, if you see that March 2023 was the second hottest March ever, right? The way people read that report and understand that report is very different. Now, we have been reading such reports from a long time. from at least last 10 years, every now and then you will see reports saying this was the hottest year, this was the hottest month. So when you're constantly exposed to such articles without a deeper understanding, there will be an impact on our psyche, on our thinking. Initially, there will be panic, there will be concern, there will be assumption that it's all because of climate change, but later we will get used to it. This will become the new normal. It will become part of day-to-day life, and we may stop paying enough attention to the core issues of climate change and global warming. Now see, you saw this happening with COVID-19 pandemic as well. Initially, when the pandemic was reported, there was panic and chaos everywhere in the initial few weeks. But within a couple of months, everyone got used to it, right? That is how human psyche operates. When you're constantly exposed to a risk factor, we get accustomed to it, we adapt to it, and it becomes normal day-to-day life, correct? But when something springs all of a sudden, right, when you don't really understand the context, that triggers another extreme reaction, which is panic. So we can't afford to do this when it comes to the topic of climate change. We can't panic. At the same time, we can't normalize this. We can't treat this as normal day-to-day life. So we need to understand the exact context here. We need to know what are the processes involved in causing these temperature abnormalities. What's the role of climate change? And what exactly can we do? That is something we need to understand. So this is where the column is providing that scientific clarity for us. The writer of the column is relying on scientific data brought out by the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the US NOAA. It brings out monthly and annual reports regarding global abnormal temperatures. And based on this data, the article is carrying out an evaluation to help us understand what does it exactly mean when we say that March 2023 was the second hottest March ever. See, this is where you should understand a basic concept. To begin with, you should understand a very simple basic concept, that is the difference between weather and climate. See, many of the beginners with regard to UPSC exams, they are often confused about weather and climate. This is a school level concept, a primary school level concept. But since the fundamentals are not strong, many of them, they interchangeably use the word weather and climate. Never ever do that mistake. Weather and climate are entirely different, right? Weather is essentially a reference to the short-term state of the atmosphere, the short-term changes that you experience, right? For example, today it might be raining, tomorrow it might be sunny, day after it might be foggy, right? So that is weather, the short-term changes that you experience on land, in the atmosphere, which lasts maybe few days, few hours or few weeks. That is weather. Whereas climate is a long-term weather pattern that is specific to a region. See, weather changes day to day or season to season, but climate remains the same for decades together, maybe even for centuries together. So climate is a reference to a long-term phenomena, how the long-term weather patterns behave in a given region. That is climate. Whereas weather is a more short-term phenomena which keeps changing on a day-to-day basis, weekly basis, monthly, seasonal basis. Got it? For example, India has a certain type of climate. Temperate countries have a certain type of climate. So that is a long-term phenomena. Whereas weather is something that changes seasonally or maybe even on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes within a single day, you will experience different weathers, right? So please understand this essential concept. So when researchers say that this March was the second warmest month of March, they are obviously basing it on the historical data. They're comparing it with historical data. But this does not mean that every year the temperature is increasing. Because see, they're referring to global average temperature. The temperature experienced in different parts of the world will be different. All right? So you can't equate the temperature you and me are experiencing, let's say in India, with temperatures in other countries. If you take the global mean, yes, then March was the hottest month, correct. But if you localize that, obviously there will be changes. There will be weather-based variations. So climate change alone is not the factor. There are few natural factors, phenomena as well responsible for these abnormalities. Understanding this is very important because this will help us pay attention to the core issues of climate change. Then you will not normalize it. Because every month, every year, there will be some record temperature. And if that keeps getting reported without the actual context, we will get used to it, we'll treat that as the normal. And we might take away our attention from climate action. So we should clearly understand what abnormal conditions are coming up because of climate change and what abnormal conditions happen regularly as a result of natural phenomena. See, if the warmest March occurred in 2016, this was the hottest month of March that has ever been reported. It was mainly a result of the biggest El Nino phenomena of the 21st century, which reportedly caused a mini global warming. Alright, if March 2023 is the second warmest month of March, then the warmest month of March was in 2016 on record. This was mainly a result of a El Nino phenomena. Of course, climate change is playing a long-term role. The greenhouse gas emissions we have released over the last 200 years is contributing to global warming. There is no doubt about it. But this abnormality which occurred in 2016 was not just because of climate change. There was another natural phenomena called El Nino, which played a direct role in further spiking the global average temperatures, thus turning March 2016 into the warmest month of March ever. Alright? So next year, the temperature actually fell in the month of March. I'm stressing on this point because UPSC might give you a prelims question. That month on month temperature is constantly increasing. Average temperatures are constantly increasing. Statement is correct or wrong? It's an incorrect statement. Let's say this month, let's say April 23, might record very high temperatures, but next April, April 24, might see a drop in temperature. So each March, the actual temperature you experience might be warm or cooler than before. It depends on a variety of factors. It depends on global climatic factors. It is driven by climate change, which is induced by human activities, and it's also influenced by weather patterns and many other geochemical and geophysical processes. So natural climate variability, along with these abnormal events like El Nino, also play a role in influencing the temperature that we experience. Correct? Phenomena like La Nina brings cooler temperatures, whereas El Nino brings higher temperatures. Alright? Let me just tell you what is this El Nino and La Nina. La Nina is a very unique pattern that we observe related to global weather conditions. Alright, and this specifically occurs in the Pacific, in the equatorial Pacific. In the equatorial Pacific between Australia and Peru, that is between Australia and South America, in a normal year, you have the cold Peruvian current, the oceanic current here. So along the coast of Latin America and Peru, you have these cold waters, whereas the warmer waters are moving from the east to west direction. This is the natural normal process. Accordingly, trade winds also move in a certain direction. So this has a worldwide impact. This normal condition that exists here has an impact on weather patterns in Australia, in South America, in North America, also on Southeast Asia and especially on India. But during a La Nina year, there is an abnormality. During a La Nina year, there is a much colder temperature being reported in the surface waters of equatorial Pacific. You can see how the area of the cold water has increased and how the warm waters have been pushed further into Southeast Asia. So this below normal cooling of the waters in equatorial Pacific, in the central equatorial Pacific, it has an impact on global weather patterns. For example, if you take the impact of La Nina on India, does anyone know how does it influence India's weather? Can anyone tell me in the comments? What does La Nina do for India? Is it good? Is it bad? Very good. It brings more rainfall. It is good for Indian monsoons. It actually strengthens the Indian monsoons and brings more rainfall for India and also brings down the temperatures in India. You see the exact opposite happening during a El Nino year. See, last 3 years were La Nina years for India. That's why we got very good rainfall. Our agriculture delivered the highest productivity. It was good for our rural areas and farmers because we got record monsoon rains, because last 3 years were La Nina years. But this year there is a lot of concern. It's been predicted that this year 2023 will be a El Nino year, which is the opposite of La Nina. Alright? In a El Nino year, you witness warmer temperature, warmer waters near the Peruvian coast. And as a result, the water here starts moving from west to east. The current from Australia to Peru, it moves in this west to east direction, thus weakening the easterly winds. And it has a direct impact on the monsoon trade winds. So El Nino is bad news for India. El Nino will increase the temperatures in India, and more importantly, it will hit our monsoon rainfall. It could lead to a deficit rainfall, thus having a direct economic impact and a huge impact on agriculture and the rural economy. It could even result in drought conditions in the arid, semi-arid regions of India. So these are some natural processes that take place. Along with that, of course, there is climate change, human-induced climate change, which has aggravated the concerns. And there are local variations as well, the natural climate variations which happen. So they all play a role in influencing the weather in a particular location. So the moment you read a news such as this was the hottest year, this was the hottest month, don't panic. At the same time, don't take it very lightly. You need to understand the context in which the report is coming out. Of course, the global weather and climatic patterns is reporting a lot of abnormality. Within India, for example, northwest region is receiving excess rains in the last at least 10 years. The parts of Punjab towards Jammu and Kashmir, towards Pakistan and Afghanistan, northwestern part of India, right, is reporting more rainfall than normal. There are scorching heat waves being reported in Kerala and Odisha. Forest fires have increased in their frequency and intensity across the Indian subcontinent. And the Arabian Sea has become warmer, which is an ideal condition for cyclogenesis. This is enhancing cyclonic activity in the Arabian Sea. Generally, Bay of Bengal witnesses more cyclogenesis, more cyclonic activity, because Bay of Bengal is warmer than Arabian Sea. But due to several weather and climatic factors, including climate change, Arabian Sea is becoming warmer, and directly it's playing a role in increased cyclonic activity. Right? Similarly, erratic weather patterns can be noted around the world. Australia has witnessed massive floods. Europe has witnessed drought and floods. Russia, Africa, there is no region on earth which has been spared. So these temperature abnormalities that you are witnessing, some of them are natural. It's happening as part of the natural process. But yes, some of them are driven by man-made climate change. Alright? So understanding and appreciating these processes is very important. Developing a scientific understanding is important. So we pay attention to climate action. We pay attention to reducing emissions, taking the right measures to tackle climate change. So please remember, the weather that we all experience, the climate that we experience in the long run, it's all a result of the interaction between land, ocean and atmosphere. These processes, the natural biogeochemical cycles, the carbon cycle, water cycle, and the oceanic currents, the wind currents, right? The interaction between land, ocean and atmosphere. It is these processes which produce the weather and climate that we experience. All right? So global warming, yes, is definitely a concern, but does not mean that each month, each year will be warmer than the previous year. That's a very, very important concept. Clear? This year we might report record temperatures. Next year in a certain place, temperatures might actually fall. Even the mean temperature might actually fall, because there are other factors at play as well. So don't get confused between weather and climate, and that is the point the writers are making. So historically, Indian monsoon has taken a hit during El Nino season. Alright, that's another key point that you can note down from here. But one good news is that there is reduced snowfall in the Eurasian landmass. This is also connected with Indian monsoons. Whenever there is reduced snowfall in Eurasia, on Eurasian landmass, it has favored a stronger Indian monsoon. Fortunately for India this year, reduced snowfall is expected in Eurasia. In the winter season, Eurasia has already reported a reduced snowfall. This actually strengthens the Indian monsoon. So it might help counter the El Nino condition, which is being predicted. If El Nino were indeed to occur in the equatorial Pacific, It is bad news, as I told you. We have a related article in the economy page on page 16. It talks about the risks for the Indian economy this year. It talks about fluctuating oil prices, inflation. All of them are a threat for the Indian economy. And similarly, El Nino is a major risk. If El Nino were to kick in and if it has an impact on Indian monsoons, it will affect agriculture and the whole economy. But one good news is there has been reduced snowfall in the Eurasian landmass, which is favorable for the monsoon. So it might help counter the impact of El Nino, at least to some extent. So that is another key point for your prelims. So climate scientists and researchers have the responsibility here to give you that context, because common man cannot understand the context. We just look at the headlines, right? So to get the right message, to develop the right understanding, we need the context which should be given by researchers and climate scientists. And that is what this article is trying to do. It's trying to help us understand scientifically the reason behind these temperature abnormalities. All right? Next, on page number 10, we have an important article related to genome sequencing. Trust me, it's a very, very important topic, both for your prelims and your mains. From science and technology, it's a very, very important topic. So let's understand what is genome sequencing, why is it in news? The topic is in news because recently, the Department of Biotechnology has brought out some information regarding Genome India project. Genome India project is a very ambitious genome sequencing project being sponsored by the Department of Science and Technology. The Indian government is sponsoring the Genome India project by collaborating with several private research institutions. The purpose here is to sequence human genome of Indians and sequence at least 10,000 Indian human genomes. The idea is to create a database of Indian human genomes. And according to Department of Biotechnology, at least 2/3 of this research is complete. 7,000 Indian human genomes have been sequenced and 3,000 of them are already publicly available for scientists and researchers. This key update was given by Department of Biotechnology regarding our Genome India project. So this is the context. So we need to understand what is genome sequencing. What's the science behind it? What are the applications? Why is it necessary? How does it help? Are there any similar global initiatives? And why has India started this initiative called Genome India project? So these are some basic facts and concepts that you need. See, as you know, every cell in our body contains a nucleus, correct? And the nuclei is essentially made up of the DNA, the genetic material that we all talk about, deoxyribonucleic acid, right? It's the DNA which resides in the nucleus of every cell, which defines our characteristics, our traits, our features. Understood? So the DNA that we carry, it is made up of these genomes. The traits that we exhibit, the physical traits, the attributes, the features of every organism is dependent on the genome structure that we are born with, right? And this is like a fingerprint. It's unique to every organism, each individual. Every single human being will have a different genome sequence, all right? So in your DNA structure, which is a double-stranded helix structure, DNA is arranged in a double-stranded helical structure. So there are these base pairs which define the DNA structure. Correct? You would have studied this in basic biology. So humans, we do have an identical sequence of base pairs. All humans, we have an identical sequence of base pairs. But the order in which the base pairs are arranged is different for every single human being. Every single human being has a different genome sequence. The order in which the base pairs are arranged is different for every single human being. So this is like a fingerprint, a unique identification for every single human. The same applies for every other organism. Now, if you can break down this genomic sequence within the DNA, right? If you can pull out the order in which the base pairs are arranged, if you can decode that, this sequence serves a very, very important scientific purpose. It helps in understanding the genetic composition of your population And more importantly, it plays a critical role in tackling diseases, in developing better vaccines, better drugs, and in treating several life-threatening conditions. That is why genome sequencing is very essential. And there is a global project for this called the Human Genome Project. It was started in 1990s as a collaborative global initiative between several countries and several institutions. And through the Human Genome Project, the first full-length human genome was sequenced in 2003. Back in 2003, the first full-length human sequence was sequenced. And 20 years later, recently in 2023, the latest version of human genome sequence has been completed with just an error margin of 0.3%. That is the accuracy with which human genome has been sequenced through the Global Human Genome Project. All right? So there are latest technologies available where the entire genome of a human being can be sequenced, including all the base pair combinations. And this facilitates in identifying one individual from another, in studying their parentage, their lineage, the genetic composition in the society, in the country, and more importantly, in understanding diseases, in understanding genetic flaws. Because see, the diseases that we suffer from could be cancer, could be even non-communicable diseases, or could be genetic disorders, cystic fibrosis, thalassemia, right, sickle cell anemia. Many of these diseases that humans suffer from, sometimes they occur because of genetic disorders and genetic malfunctioning. Sometimes even a single gene malfunction is enough to make those people vulnerable for certain types of diseases. Certain people suffer from organ malfunction because they have a genetic disorder. So to treat those conditions, to better understand the disease occurring mechanisms in human beings, for understanding cancer, for developing treatment for cancer, and treating other genetic disorders, genome sequencing is absolutely essential. This also helps you develop better vaccines, better drugs for treating infectious diseases as well. Because you can study pathogens better, you can break down the genome sequence of viruses and bacteria, understand how they are going to mutate, where exactly you should target the drug, thereby develop more efficient vaccines and drugs. Take the case of Ebola. Ebola has been largely contained with better treatment because genome sequencing has played a critical role in developing efficient lines of treatment. The COVID-19 pandemic is a classic example. As soon as SARS coronavirus 2 broke out in Wuhan, Chinese researchers, they carried out genome sequencing of this novel virus. As they realized it was a new pathogen they were dealing with, they quickly carried out a genome sequence which was crucial in helping the global community. They put up the genome sequence online and made it publicly available so researchers from around the world could access the genome sequence of SARS coronavirus 2, the initial variant which broke out in Wuhan. This helped biotech companies, pharmaceuticals, and even researchers to come out with better vaccines, better lines of treatment for dealing with the pandemic. India also has set up an initiative called INSACOG, or Indian SARS coronavirus 2 Genomics Consortia, to understand the mutations that the coronavirus is undergoing. Right? Every few weeks we are seeing new variants coming up, posing different degrees of threat. So we need to constantly track the threat from the pandemic. So genome sequencing is critical here. And India also is a leader in the field of genome sequencing. So this technology plays a critical role in healthcare sector to understand genetic disorders, to treat diseases, and to develop better vaccines and drugs. So India has launched the Genome India project, which is backed by the Department of Science and Technology, that is the Department of Biotechnology, along with participation from private institutions and research institutions. It's a government-funded project. India is trying to create a database of India's population. Right? Out of 1.4 billion people that we have, researchers have identified at least 4,600 distinct population groups. We have lineages with different parts of the world, right? And there would be many communities in India which are endogamous, meaning they would have bred within the community. They would have married within the community, producing children within the community, thereby limiting their genetic diversity. This sometimes leads to genetic disorders. That's why there are certain ground rules when it comes to marriage. right? When it comes to hereditary, the line of parentage, there are certain relations which are not feasible. If such endogamous relations were to occur, and if they produce a kid, the children who would be born will be born with genetic disorders. Correct? That's why exogamous marriages are always promoted. And India wants to understand this better. The government wants to have a better understanding of the population groups we have, and more importantly, get a hold of disease-causing mutations in human genome. There are different population groups in India suffering from different diseases. They are more prone. Certain people with a certain genome sequence are more prone to certain diseases and certain disorders. So we need to get hold of this. We need to further conduct research on this. That is why we need genome sequencing. So at least 10,000 full-length human genome sequences are being developed under this project, and 7,000 sequences are already completed. All right, 3,000 have been made publicly available, and it will help the research institutions, the pharma companies, to come up with better vaccines and better drugs. It will help the healthcare industry to develop better lines of treatment to handle all these diseases and life-threatening conditions. So that is the application and the key purpose of Genome India project. All right. So with this, we come to the last part of today's discussion. We have 3 small articles related to prelims. On page number 12, there's one more article related to the healthcare sector. It makes a mention of National Health Account Estimates for India. This is a periodic report which is brought out by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Is that clear? Every year, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare publishes this report. It's an estimate of healthcare expenditure in India. It provides an estimation of the money spent by public sector and private sector on healthcare in India. This is a key tool. It's a key metric to track India's healthcare expenditure and healthcare progress. It describes the government expenditure on healthcare and also the expenditure of private healthcare sector. So in the latest report for 2019-2020, it has been observed that out-of-pocket expenditure for Indians has declined from 62.6% in 2014-15 to 47.1% in 2019-20. Now this is quite a big decline in out-of-pocket expenditure. See, out-of-pocket expenditure means the money that you spend out of your own pocket for accessing healthcare facilities. Now, in a developing country like India, where we still have a large poor population, healthcare becomes inaccessible if out-of-pocket expenditure is very high. In countries where healthcare system is dominated by private hospitals, private clinics, private doctors, that is where out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure will be very high. So the only way you can bring down out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure is to make more investments in public healthcare, where government will spend more. Government will provide free accessible healthcare to the citizens, thus bringing down out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure. India's biggest problem in healthcare sector has always been that we have had high out-of-pocket expenditure. So this data which the government is bringing out presents a positive development. There has been a decline in out-of-pocket expenditure, and the report also notes that the government's spending on healthcare has increased as a percentage of GDP from 1.13% to 1.35%. See, India's total healthcare expenditure is roughly around 3 to 3.5% of the GDP. That includes both public and private expenditure. If you minus the private healthcare expenditure, remaining is the government's budget, the government's healthcare budget. So this accounts for around 1.35% of our GDP, which is an improvement compared to before, because previously it was just around 1.13%. These numbers are extremely low for a large country like India. If you look at similar countries, their healthcare budgets would be 3%, 4%, or even 4.5% of their GDP. That is the minimum government spending needed to provide for good quality, accessible healthcare for the poor and to reduce their out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure. But India's healthcare spending is very low from the government. That is why healthcare expenditure still remains very high. That is what we take away from this important report. Next, on page 13, we have an article related to SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. If you guys remember, on the 21st of April, just 5 days back, I had covered SCO in detail. I had given the basic facts regarding SEO, which is important for your prelims. We spoke about the members of SEO, when it was established, right? The key initiatives of SEO. So I'm not going to touch that again. Please go back and watch the analysis of 21st April. But here there is one development which has been reported, that India is all prepared to host the defense ministers meeting of SEO this week. This means Chinese defense minister would also visit India. India is currently holding the chair of SEO. So India will be hosting the SEO summit at Goa next month. So as the chair of SEO, we are hosting a series of meetings. Recently, we had a meeting of disaster management officials and ministers. Now, the defense ministers meeting is taking place. This marks the first time that a Chinese leader is visiting India in the last 4 years. Ever since the Ladakh crisis broke out and escalated, right? No Chinese high-level visit has taken place to India. There has been a complete breakdown of relations. But the visit of Chinese defense minister marks a big shift. It might give an opportunity for normalizing the ties and de-escalating the border tensions. And the other important point to note is that SEO is also a military grouping. Along with being a political economic grouping, it's also a military grouping which focuses on counter-terrorism and security of the region. Under SEO, there is a dedicated platform for counter-terrorism called RATS, Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure. All right? It's a dedicated platform under SEO to counter-terrorism. Now, please take a small exercise. Find out where RATS is headquartered. In which city is the headquarters of RATS located? Find that out and post that in the comments below. Now, the last article from page 16 from economy section. In this article, the government has expressed concern about e-commerce platforms that are operating in India. See, the government is bringing out an e-commerce policy. It's planning an e-commerce policy, which has already been objected by the private companies and even by foreign companies. But when it comes to the e-commerce sector, there are a lot of controversies and a lot of issues. If you look at the big e-commerce players in India, be it Amazon, which is an American company, be it domestic homegrown companies like Flipkart, Snapdeal, etc. The list goes on, right? We have many e-marketplaces. The problem is, some of these companies have engaged in questionable and fraudulent practices. They've engaged in anti-competitive practices, which helps them establish their monopoly in the market. So the government has been trying to curb this trend. If you guys know, just a few months before, Amazon and Flipkart, they themselves were sellers on their platforms. They would have their own warehouse, they would procure their own products, and they would be selling their own products on their own marketplace. The government of India has put a ban on this. Through FDI policy, a restriction has been placed on e-commerce sector that marketplace companies cannot sell their own products. Amazon cannot be having its own warehouse and selling products on its own platform because they will prioritize their own products, thereby giving themselves a dominant position. So these companies were forced to end this practice and they have been turned into a e-marketplace. It's just an online market where any seller can come and sell the goods to a buyer. These should be platforms linking a seller with a buyer. They themselves shouldn't become sellers of everything because that allows them to exercise their dominant position and establish a monopoly, thereby wiping out competition, wiping out the small sellers and small players. So through FDI policy, there is a restriction that these companies, they cannot have their own products being sold on their platform. They should just be a marketplace where they are linking the seller with the buyer. Now the other problem here is that many of these companies are resorting to questionable methods, which the government has called as a cheating practice. They give these attractive sales, flash sales. They say products are on 50% off, 80% off. But there is a fraud involved behind this. This is a case of mispricing. It's a case of misinformation where they are misinforming the customer, tricking the customer to buy. And they are pushing the customers towards preferred sellers and preferred products. So that is why the government is talking to these e-commerce companies, asking them not to practice such fraudulent methods, and it's coming out with an e-commerce policy as well. So to prevent these methods and these practices, the government has set up a platform called Open Network for Digital Commerce. All right, this is very, very important. The Open Network for Digital Commerce can be important for your prelims. This is an open source e-marketplace that has been set up by the government with the backing of the government to create a more equal and level playing field for all sellers. All right, it's a digital platform. It functions as a not-for-profit organization. Now, for example, let's say you want to buy a phone. You go on Amazon, you go on Flipkart. So when you search for a particular phone, you see the products only of that e-marketplace. Let's say you're looking for an iPhone or an Android phone. All right. The moment you search on Amazon, Amazon will show products listed only on Amazon. You can't see the price of other platforms. You have to carry out a separate search on Flipkart, on Snapdeal, etc. Correct? So you don't have the complete picture. You don't know what exactly is the price being offered by the competitor. Correct? So consumer here is not able to make the right choice because you're limited in this ecosystem. If you're using a particular app, be it Amazon, Flipkart, or any other app, right? Be it Nykaa, Myntra, there are numerous applications. When you're ordering on a particular application, you see only their products. You can't compare there itself with the products listed on other competitor platforms. This is where Open Network for Digital Commerce comes in. This government-backed e-marketplace, it's a not-for-profit organization which allows you to compare the prices of products on all the platforms. Now, let's say you search for a type of shoes on Amazon. If you do this using the ONDC platform, you can see the prices of the same shoe on Amazon, Flipkart, and all the other competitors. So consumer will get the choice to opt for the best quality and the best price. The chances of you getting duped by these companies through so-called sales will reduce. So the government is encouraging all the big retailers in India like HTC, Reliance Industries, Godrej, and ITC. It's encouraging all of them to get registered on ONDC platform and sell their products here so that the consumers will have more choice and consumers will not be cheated by the e-commerce companies which might be leveraging the dominant position they have in the market. So UPSC might ask you, what is Open Network for Digital Commerce? So please make a note. It's a not-for-profit organization. It's an open source digital commerce platform where you can access product information and price information of all e-commerce sites on a single platform. Got it? So this completes my discussion for today. I've given 2 practice questions based on what I have discussed at the beginning. So please take them up seriously, write your answers and post the answer in the answer writing portal, for which link is given in the description below. And don't forget, head to our Telegram channel right now. We'll have a quiz on these topics. It'll help you revise these topics again. So I hope it was a good, productive session. Do let me know how it went, and I'll see you tomorrow again. Until then, take care. Have a good day.